Thanks for appearing. I have the good fortune to be joined today by three very distinct and interesting participants in the AI healthcare field. And so I thought that what we would do to begin is I would just ask each of us to introduce ourselves and also to present sort of at least one thought about how, from their particular perspective and their background and their industry and their experience, how the question of the panel, which is what are the key challenges of delivering high-impact AI in healthcare, how their experiences would bear on that specific question. So I will lead by example. I will go first. My name is James Brousseau. I am a philosophy professor at Pace University downtown in Manhattan. And in the springs, so I teach in the philosophy department there. Spring semesters, I teach in computer science and information engineering at the University of Trento in Italy. So I do the AI ethics class there in Italy. And another thing that I do on the sort of European side of my existence is I work with a group of other philosophers, lawyers, doctors, data scientists, and so on, to do ethics evaluations of AI-intensive companies, especially in healthcare. And so in the course of one of those investigations, we were working with a company called Cardiccio. And what they do is they take your EKG, big data, predictive analytics, and determine whether or not you are at risk of heart disease. So they were bringing this out to market, and the result that you would get if you went in and you took this test was a computer science result, which is, we would tell the patient, look, you have, with a 90% certainty, you have a 50% chance of having a heart attack within 5 years. Right? And all of us thought, oh, well, this is great information. But then it occurred to us, well, the patients, they have no idea what that means. Well, what does this mean? 90% certainty, 50% of a heart attack? And what patients want to hear, right, is, well, I may have a heart problem because I have too much cholesterol or something. That they want human kind of information. So I think my quick answer to this question about problems or obstacles with respect to AI healthcare, my quick response is that we need to find some way to translate the language of predictive analytics into the language of human patients. So with that to begin, I will pass the baton.
Me first?
Please.
Thank you. My name is Brad Hastedt. I'm the director of AI for Dataforce North America. We help support AI and machine learning teams with human annotated training data for projects ranging from speech to text, speech recognition, to conversational AI, natural language generation, to computer vision, image and object recognition. We support, in the beginning part of the model building process, optimizing training data sets, really leveraging what we've built over the past 30 years, which is a community nearly 2 million strong of subject matter experts, domain expertise folks, linguists, translators, to really optimize these training data sets for our clients. We participate in a variety of industries, but have a big presence in healthcare and life science. And as I mentioned, we're really working with data, the training data, the beginning part of the model building process. And there's a variety of challenges, and a couple of them being relevant data. There a lot of the conversations we have with clients are, they've got plenty of data, but is it relevant for what they're trying to predict, the models that they're trying to build? Where are they sourcing that from? If they do have plenty of data, how's it being labeled? How's it being annotated? Projects like that, and those are a variety of different challenges. And then certainly with when it comes to privacy, there might be lots of data that a machine learning team is working with, but that might not be. They might not be allowed to use it when building and training models. So how do you partner with an outside team to help create those data sets to be able to train and make these models better. And then lastly, a huge problem is these teams they're overloaded. Bandwidth is an issue. There's plenty of data, but who preps it, who labels it, who makes it relevant to train these models? And so that's really the types of conversations that we're having every day.
Just out of curiosity, do you have any specific steps you're taking to deal with incoming regulations about privacy and difficulty of acquiring data that you can use? It seems to me that this is going to become increasingly pressing, the issue, right? As we see that we can do more and more in terms of healthcare advances if we have the information, there's going to be a lot of pressure on people to share their data. So I'm sort of curious about if you've seen.
Yeah, it's tough, and certainly it all has to be within HIPAA compliance and everything. But we have a specific use case where a client was building an application that was between a patient-doctor relationship and an NLP type model that was for that type of interaction. And obviously that interaction is guarded and not allowed to use it when you train an NLP model. So what we did was actually create that scenario in a third-party secure location where those types of interactions and questions and answer sessions that go on between a practitioner and a patient, we recreated those and got those back to the client where they then begin training that model and making it more accurate.
It's a creative solution. Sabrina, could you share with us
Hi.
your background and thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm Sabrina Shea. I'm the Director of Ethical AI and External Innovation at Pfizer. Right now, before joining Pfizer, I've worked at IBM Research and also in a series of startups. So I have been productionizing and operationalizing health AI solution for over 15 years now. So we have seen a lot going on in this space from the beginning to the current state. And one thing I will mention is this thing that we saw that a lot of good AI model has been produced on the technical side. Right, Theo will also talk more about this later. But we have seen over 10,000 papers a year in the health AI space. But when it comes to the real deployment and eventually adoption, sustainable adoption, it's really problematic to see that how slowly the AI solution has been adopted really in the field despite all the hype, right? So there are certain traits in this healthcare domain that prohibit it from being adopted and deployed and adopted in the first place. But also lately there are more discussion here about bias. What kind of bias has been introduced starting from the labeling process, which Brad can talk more about, to the concept drift, to the data drift and to the post-deployment stage. For how did you then introduce that interpretation-driven bias into the use of your models in the real-world applications, right? So all these different bias that can be introduced in the data science cycle has really been a prohibiting issue for AI model to be trusted in the first place and then be adopted as a standard in the workflow, right? Also, another big issue here is the integration with the clinical workflow. I've witnessed on the first hand that a lot of these good AI models, when being implemented in the field, if there is no compatible behavioral change framework to be also coupled with the AI models there for the clinician who are on the front line, who is the frontline user, to use it in the appropriate way and also to trust it in the first place to use it, then it will be problematic when we are trying to claim that success of an AI model in the real applications, right? And that has a lot of issue going into it, right? From top-down executives' approval and the change management process to the bottom-up approach. How did you know who in that workflow to be in the best position now to be influenced in order for this AI-driven decision to be aided in that workflow and without overburdening the users in that process, right? And even more, do you really need to then know everything AI models has produced, or is it just needed for certain actionable insight to be surfaced at certain points when it's really critical for that clinical users to know, right? All these little pieces have to be thought through very carefully before these models can really be adopted in a real application in a sustainable way, right? But it hasn't been the case in many scenarios that we lately, we have seen these Michigan studies, we can talk more about it later, that has, it has already done this multi-site study on certain EHR vendor who implemented certain algorithm and deploy commercially into the systems without going through the whole validation process, right? And it has been proven to be harmful for patients if you do it that way. But EHR has been historically a gray area for regulation. So it hasn't been really put under all this compliance control flow if needed. But for the innovation's sake, right? It was great argument to make 20 years ago when you first started, and a lot of us informaticists actually go into lobby for that at that time, which we still support the argument, right? But today, then there might be a need here for us to revisit whether that gray area need to be regulated a little bit more, at least going through certain standardization process for us to all agree on a set of evaluation criteria that can eventually be adopted more widely, right? So on the side of my job, I'm also chairing the AI showcase for American Medical Informatics Association. So that's one of the effort we are putting in this year. We are starting to culling first from collecting the best practice example out there for the evaluation across technical model performance to workflow usability to finally the impact, right? How did you influence patient outcomes or clinical adoption? All this throughout these 3 stages evaluation, we need to have some sort of standard. But starting from collecting the best practice example, we want to call for action here to start getting that consensus emerge for setting up the industrial standard for the regular body to look into. So I will stop here first, as this is a set of challenge we have seen in each stages of this AI adoption flow.
Indeed. And Theo, from your perspective, what do you see coming down the pike at us?
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Theo Zanos. I'm the head of the Neural and Data Science Lab at the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research and Northwell Health. For those that don't know Northwell Health, we're the largest health system in New York with over 23 hospitals and around 700 outpatient clinics. And my team is focusing on developing these tools and deploying them in our hospitals whenever possible. So we interact a lot with clinicians, of course, that these are our main collaborators that kind of like stake out and identify the issues and where AI could potentially solve. And we've been at it for about 6.5 years. And our batting average of building the models have been pretty good. So we built these years around 15 to 20 different models with different use cases. Our batting average when it comes to deploying them has been pretty much industry standard, which is less than 10%. So we deployed 2 of them, right, out of the 20 that we've, and even those are in pilot deployment, so they're not deployed throughout our whole health system. And there are multiple reasons for this, and everyone touched upon many of them, and we can go into details about all of these different issues. But for us, one of the main, I guess, issue that we've identified is that there needs to, a model by itself, no matter how good it is, how accurate it is, and even how useful it is to the clinician cannot be deployed by itself. It needs to have a change management process that follows that. And I can give an example just to be a bit more concrete. One of the more, let's say, successful models that we've built was this model we call Let Sleeping Patients Lie. And the idea there is that we wake patients up every night out of an abundance of caution. Every 3 to 4 hours we measure their vitals, so around 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 a.m., the nurse will walk in the patient's room, wake them up, take their blood pressure, take their temperature, take their heart rate. And that is disruptive. Nobody likes being woken up at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. It's not good for their recovery. It's not good for the patient experience in the hospital. So we set out to build a model. It's a very simple idea. Just identify the people that are perfectly stable. They definitely don't need to be woken up and check their vitals, and just omit those overnight unnecessary vitals. So we built a model. It was working great. We built it on more than 2 million patients and 27 million vitals. It performed well. We published it. It went through all the peer review steps. And then it was the time to deploy it. And everybody was buying into the model. I mean, everybody loved the idea. They really liked the nurses really loved it because it was less work for them. All the leadership thought that it was a great idea. There are actual, quiet at night initiatives throughout all hospitals in the country. So it's not like a Northwell specific problem that we're waking our patients up. So the past 1.5 years, we've been trying to pilot this model. One thing that we came up immediately was, well, it's not only the nurses that go in there. There's also the phlebotomists. There's also pharmacy that might need to give. So you had to work with everyone beyond the model to try to change their schedule, and some people don't like it. Then the other thing is that we wanted to abolish the 6 a.m. A lot of our vitals were happening at 5 a.m. Again, pretty early, again disrupting the sleep of the patient. And that's because a lot of our doctors, they start their rounds at 6 a.m. because they want to leave for like their private practices after. So, they want those vitals right when they start their rounding. So all of these issues came up, and they were completely relevant to the actual data of the model, to the accuracy and all that. And we've been working through them and solving them one at a time. And on top of the fact that, nurses, how do we surface the output of the algorithm, right? We thought at the beginning, well, we're going to try to surface it in our EHR. We're currently on all scripts. That was almost not an option because all scripts move super slow in terms of integrating outside tools. So then we started looking at alternatives. We thought, well, why don't we just email you a report every night to the nurse that works at that night with all the patients that you should wake up and all the patients that you should let sleep. Simple, right? They don't check emails. They told us like, well, we don't want emails. We don't want to check emails. So we asked, well, what would be the best? And they're like, well, why don't you just print the report in the nursing station printer? And of course, we have this high-tech supposedly solution that uses this extremely low-tech deployment application. And the problem there is that anything that could go wrong did. The printer ran out of paper. The printer ran out of toner. The printer got disconnected from the network. So, of course, that's not the best way, and now we're exploring other ways. But all of this to say that there are so many different problems that come up, even after you have like a really nice model, easy to deploy, that can be quite eye-opening in this process.
Do you think it'll always be that way with machine learning in general, building models? You mentioned solving problems one at a time, right? So as new features and new problems pop up, then you have to incorporate that into the data set and the model. Do you think it'll always be that way?
So all the problems that I listed have nothing to do with like machine learning and modeling, right? It's all like important. Management of like workflows and where you surface it and who's going to use it and proper training and all that. So that kind of speaks to the fact that, there's certain things that we can do to make this more explainable, surface the prediction at the right time, use the right data and the right validations to build up trust so that the clinicians can use it. But then there comes a time that they need to use it. And then everything's going to start popping up like, oh, this or that. And the human factor here is huge. And based on our experience, the best way to try to, I guess, predict these problems is to try to involve the frontline users, stakeholders, as early in the design of the algorithm as possible. That will tell you, when does it make sense to deploy this? What data will there be available at that specific time point for the algorithm to use? And then you move on to, okay, then what do you do with this, right? I mean, if you say, and James had a great example, with a 90% certainty, I can tell you that 50%, there's a 50% that you're gonna survive. Well, okay, I mean, that's confusing to a patient. That actually is confusing to a clinician as well. I mean,
Yeah.
they don't, what would they do? Or a nurse, like, what am I gonna do with this information? So as soon as that happens, well, forget it, they're not gonna use it. So like, there are so many different steps that need to follow after model development, validation, and all these are super important, right? That we need to start thinking, and we do, whoever deploys these models, and all these 10,000, and I'm pretty sure there are way more than that by now, papers that are out,
That's
they're
just a
great.
successful one.
That's kind of like a proof of concept that AI could potentially, in theory, solve all these different questions. The application, though, is completely different.
But there is some low-hanging fruit, I imagine. In your experience, and perhaps for all three of you, are there particular areas where you might think AI might be able to advance quickly? For example, radiology comes to mind as one where you might have limited need to consult others and so on.
Yeah, everybody talking about radiologists, right? So, because that's the place where the decision can be made in the area that involve less risk, right? So, say putting in an order, that's something that a human will still review and can have time to mediate in the middle. Then usually that kind of application will go first. But when we are talking about clinical decision support, sometimes in the field, you have to make very quick decision, right? Like sepsis, deterioration, then that will be involved in higher stake decisions. Then those applications will need to be exposed to another set of criteria for validation, evaluation. Right. So lately, the EU AI Act actually has started implementing this risk management pyramid, right? So I will imagine the same will be needed for our clinical application later. At the top, there will be some area that you actually maybe shouldn't consider touching, that's related to manipulating human behavior, things like that, right? And then that pyramid, there's also high-risk application, which will involve certain important human decisions that are high stake that need to be further regulated and go through the confirmatory confirmation. Then there will be medium risk level where there are things that you can let it go a bit more leniently, as it can, you don't want to always include a very rigorous confirmatory process to stifle innovation in that space, right? And finally, there will be the low risk place where you can just go free with innovation, right? But that kind of regulatory frameworks need to be in place for us to be able to trust it further. And I think we are still in that process of finding best practice example in each of these categories, and then eventually we will see that emerge, it can be proposed.
And then, Brad, down on the level of data, does that translate into your world, this idea that there's the high, medium, and low risk, and that amount
Yeah, I
of
think there is.
regulation?
Yeah, from a data perspective, I think anything that's lower risk is probably the low-hanging fruit right now. We just worked on an engagement that involves skin conditions and wound care and things like that, where the data involved to train the models wasn't really private. There was no personally identifiable information involved in the data sets. The client felt comfortable having another party work on those data sets to help better label and structure them better. And for us to provide a certain subject matter expertise on that. So I think anything where the client or these teams that are working on these models, where there's a little bit lower risk and they feel more comfortable with those data sets, those are probably the faster problems to solve first.
That actually brings us around. My voice is going up and down depending on how I hold the microphone. I did make a promise myself to you that I would allow, that we would allow questions. We're all in agreement. I thought that maybe I would just make one last point and then we could open the floor. I think another problem with AI healthcare comes up in this question of skin. And this was a case I worked on with this group I talked about previously. And we were using AI to diagnose skin cancer. Now, as it happens, the AI diagnoses skin cancer better the lighter your skin is. AI does very poorly with dark skin for obvious reasons. Dark skin absorbs light, so the AI does not identify skin cancer. So what do you say? You would normally say, well, it looks like this AI is, you're talking about bias, is biased or racist against darker skinned people. But it's also true, this is curious, it's also true that the darker your skin, the less vulnerable you are and the less likely you are to get skin cancer. So it's a very complex kind of fairness or ethics question that gets asked. It's true that the AI works better the lighter your skin, but it's also true that your risk is higher if your skin is lighter. So is an AI that is imbalanced one way or the other, is that fair or unfair? Is that biased or unbiased? That would be another kind of question that I think we're going to have to address in this field of AI healthcare. With that said, please, if anyone has a question, we are eager to hear your thoughts.
Hi, thank you very much to all the panelists for the insightful panel. It's interesting to hear your challenges and the rate of implementation of models and projects. My question is maybe more for Jennifer. Since you are with Pfizer, how would you compare these challenges of implementations of the good work that has been done internally and with partners for drug development compared to actual clinical applications?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, FDA has been highly involved in this space for the drug development, right? So that has been a highly regulated space where there is a set of rules, clinical trial, right, to start involving, and there has been years of practice, multiple parties, stakeholders, discussion have been involved in developing those, right? But right now, what we are seeing in the AI ML space is that we need to do that in discussion while the technology are still being developed, which make it more messy, if I could put it that way, right? So we sort of, and there is a difference between the EU approach and the USA FDA approach, right? Where you usually would like to take this more top-down approach. They will define the scheme beforehand with all the understanding from stakeholders, while FDA will like to wait a little bit, and it's in general, the US legal authority are taking this approach to wait for the industry actually to converge to certain standards before they can decide what's the best practice to be taken up here, right? So certainly FDA has already putting out the AI ML best practice guideline and has started approving AI ML as medical devices. We see over 350 just last year has been approved in that way, right? But that's just a small set considering all these models out there. I believe right now, not everyone is really going through that route, right? Including those commercially deploy algorithm from EHR that we're talking about earlier. So that need to be more clearly defined And we as an industrial partner certainly want to take part in that. We want to start by setting best practice example for the industry and start also calling for action, like what I said earlier, from other professional societies as well, to start seeing this emerging standard that we can then propose back to our legal authorities. And FDA is constantly consulting us on this front too, so we are in good conversation with them.
And what about, and I apologize for the follow-up question, I promise I will sit down after. But what about using AI and models to make business decisions that are not related to the FDI, as to, for instance, which project or product in the pipeline to prioritize, which ones actually using predictive analytics might not be a good investment to push towards a phase 2 or something like that? Is there a component of that? Do you see that these models are maybe more easily implemented in-house than at the clinical stage?
So maybe other will also have a say in that. So you meant that, just to clarify, you meant that those model making for business decision making
Yes.
instead of clinical
in
use
the
case.
drug development stages and probably early drug development.
Yeah, there are certainly used for like drug discoveries there, right? But as long as it hasn't come to the stage affecting patient outcomes directly, then that really depends on the best practice in your own corporation, organization, how you will do that, right? So even for a lot of this model in AI/ML space, we see that previously they just didn't get exposed directly to any regulation, which is something that will be discussed more now with all these EU AI acts and other acts that Canada just have an AI act coming out as well. And White House has these blueprints of AI bills of rights just get putting out, right? And even New York City has its own AI regulation now, right? So all these different parties will want to take a part in that. We will see how it emerge. I think this is still a constantly evolving space.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rajiv Menon. I'm a research scientist at NYU Langone. This is a fascinating conversation. So some of my thoughts for James. When you said that the output of AI models is is of no use to a customer, I almost felt that there's a step missing. I think the next step would be to make actionable insights so that it can give valuable information to the customer. Similar to how an MRI image comes out and a physician has no value for it or he doesn't know how to interpret that, you need a radiologist in the middle to interpret and give the information about the MRI to the physician. And to the point for Theo, I just felt that after deploying the models, it almost feels like you have to solve for edge cases after that to account for data that you've not accounted for during developing the model.
We have time for one more.
I will just give a one-sentence response to my part. Thank you. Of course, good question. But I think that in the case of this particular AI technology, there is no explainability. They don't try to make explainability. They just say, we are going to convert massive data into a prediction. And that's it. It's very powerful. But there is that disadvantage that you're pointing out. But I don't believe that a model like this could offer any kind of explainability. Because they're not even looking for that. They're only looking for patterns that correspond between this patient and others who've had one another kind of heart disease. But of course, you're right. But that's a question of explainability. I think that would have to lead on a different kind of AI.
Well, that's exactly my question. So the explainability problem. So we're currently doing a lot of work with financial services, and of course, before a hedge fund makes an investment, they want explainability. So it's we're able to kind of go into the data set and say, here's why that recommendation was made. And it certainly seems for trust and risk purposes, explainability would be important in the clinical environment as well, where I have no experience. How do you guys address explainability?
So maybe I can take that. So explainability is an interesting point because I once tried to explain a linear regression model to some clinicians, and it took me 2 hours and I completely failed. So if I am to try to explain like a LSTM RNN to a clinician, I don't think that's a good use of their time or mine. So then what is explainability? Right now, what the only way that we can explain how a model produces the results is just looking at like some like variable importance metrics or some heat maps in terms of images. That's partially explainable. You kind of see where the algorithm is looking at, but exactly why it's giving you this answer, even the engineers that build these and train these algorithms cannot tell you exactly why is that. And I think the explainability in a sense is trying to answer the wrong question, because we want explainability to enhance trust. Trust you build by deploying something that you've already shown again and again through very rigorous validation that it works very well, it's very accurate, it remains accurate, and it's surfaced at the right time, and the person that uses it, actually finds it useful. And it's kind of like a tool that you don't necessarily know exactly how it works, but it works. Like deep brain stimulation would be one. When we started implanting Parkinson patients with actual electrodes inside their brain and turning them on, the actual mechanism of how this was working, and it had miraculous effects on their health, was not known and is still under research. But yet thousands upon thousands of patients were implanted with these devices. Why? Because they were working. And at the end of the day, that's how you build trust. Of course, some part of explainability could be helpful just to make things a bit more, warm and, but yeah, I think, you can go down this like rabbit hole of explainability. The main thing is building trust by having properly validated and efficacious algorithms, and that the people that are using every day seem to be satisfied with. That's pretty much my answer.
Just want to add, right? Humans want actionable insight. They don't necessarily want explanations in this space. Maybe in financial it's different because you have to comply to the regulation. But here we are talking about human needing to build that trust in order to start using it, right? And that's why we want to have ethical AI to start with, to make sure it's not just a new kid on the block, it's someone you can really trust as a clinical colleague when it goes into clinical domain.